So we're going to study yesterday's Torah, yesterday's Torah portion. What we would have read, we would have read publicly had there been a public, but we'll study it. You know, even if you don't read publicly, you're still obligated to study, to know what the Torah says, etc. So that's what we'll do. This week's Torah portion, the one we would have read yesterday, is called Emor. And the beginning of the Parsha basically is a message to Kohanim. So if you're a Kohen, this specifically is to you, but it has ramifications for us non-Kohanim as well. So the Torah begins that God said to Moshe, speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron. And then it says, and you shall say to them that you should not contaminate yourself to a dead body. So we'll get to that in a second. There is a beautiful explanation that it says that because it says twice, God said to Moses, speak to the Kohanim, speak to them, which is a double, the Torah doesn't mince words. So the fact that it says speak to them twice is teaching us that we really need to, that there's a message here. There's two messages here. So the first message is speak to the Kohanim and tell them you're B'nai Aharon. You're very special. Speak to the Kohanim and tell them that you have an incredible responsibility as Kohanim. So don't view it as a burden, but view it as that you're a Kohen. View it as you're special, which is basically a lesson to the Jewish people that, God's chosen people, right? It's not that we're a superior race, because then that makes us like, no different than the Germans, but rather we have a responsibility, and we should grab it. We should embrace it, not try and run away from it. So that's the first thing it teaches us. And then it says that a Kohen is not allowed to contaminate himself to a dead person. That applies today. If you're a Kohen today, you are not allowed to go to IJ Morris while there's a casket, a dead body inside. You're not allowed to go to a hospital unless the mortuary is in a separate wing of the hospital as a Kohen. And you're not allowed to go to a cemetery unless you can stand 7 feet away from any grave. So that is why in cemeteries, Kohanim are usually buried closer to the gate of or closer to the road. So that way you can drive in your own car with the windows closed, so you're in your own vessel, so to speak. And then from your car, you can look out and pray at the grave, or you can get out and make sure you're 7 feet away from each grave. So that is a very practical halacha. So, however, the Torah says that a Kohen is allowed to go to 7 funerals. Allowed to go to 7 funerals. Allowed to go to one's mother, one's father. One is allowed to go to one's son, one's daughter, one's brother, one's sister who's not married, and to one's wife, one's spouse. If it's not one of those 7, you're not allowed to go, except there's one time a Kohen is allowed to go. And in the era of COVID, it does happen a lot. The Kohen, if it's something called a mess mitzvah is there's nobody to bury. There's nobody. Right? So a Kohen, for example, let's take before COVID, a Kohen is walking down the street and he sees a dead body. He's allowed to take a cloth and cover it. Normally he's not allowed to. He's not allowed to get close. He's allowed to do whatever needs to be done in order to treat this body respectfully. So that is even a Kohen, even the high priest is allowed to do it. So let's talk about the era of COVID. The era of COVID, it's happened to me 3 times. is that I was the only rabbi that showed up to this burial. There was no other family there. Nobody came. I speak to the family, a couple I knew in advance, but others I didn't. I go and I show up and there's nobody there. And the non-Jewish from the chapel, right, from the funeral home came, but I was the only Jewish person there at a Jewish funeral. That is called a met mitzvah. That is called that you're participating in where everybody else wouldn't or couldn't. So, for example, if I was a rabbi, a kohen, I couldn't go to a cemetery, right? And there's plenty of rabbis or kohanim who are unable to officiate because they're kohanim. But in such a case, I would surmise that where there's nobody going to show up, so you either find another rabbi, but if you can't find another rabbi, and you know that there's nobody going to be there to witness the burial, to help bury, and it's only the non-Jewish workman or the non-Jewish funeral home. If it's a Jewish funeral home director, maybe it's not considered a met mitzvah anymore, but maybe not because there's no one to bury. So you're allowed to show up. So in the era of COVID, you have such a thing called met mitzvah. So prior to COVID, it happened to me once when nobody else showed up. But it's happened to me since COVID 3 times where I was the only one at this grave. And I picked up the phone. I said, "Do you want to be on the phone? Do you want to hear?" Or and we did it that way. We said our prayers and I buried as much as I could. So even a Kohen is allowed to participate in a met mitzvah. So there's 7 relatives plus 1, the met mitzvah. So practically speaking, the Kohen, if he has his best friend's funeral or he has a brother-in-law's funeral, a Kohen is not allowed to show up at Ajimaris while the casket's there. What they have done, and this is more like Sinai chapels or in Queens Boulevard, I've seen is where the rabbi was a Kohen, where the rabbi came in. Before the rabbi came in, they moved the casket with the body outside. And they moved, if there was another body there, they moved it outside. The rabbi came in, gave the eulogy, the rabbi left, they brought the body back. I've seen that happen. But this is a biblical command. The next thing is the Torah tells us that a Kohen is not allowed to, it was a custom then, and this is true really of all of us, back in the day in the biblical times, and when somebody lost a loved one, they used to cut themselves. They used to make marks as a permanent reminder that they lost a loved one. We're not allowed to do that. Kohanim are not allowed to do that. A Kohen's not allowed to do that. A commoner is not allowed to do that, etc. Then the Torah tells us that a Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. That has ramifications, serious ramifications. A Kohen is not allowed to marry zonah, halala. So we'll talk about the divorcee first. So a Kohen is a Kohen is allowed to marry a widow, but a regular Kohen, there's no high priest these days, but a Kohen, we're talking about any Kohen that you know, is not allowed to marry a widow. He's allowed to marry a widow, is not allowed to marry a divorcee. So if a Kohen is, 45, never married, so he either has to find a woman that's never been married or a widow. He cannot marry a divorcee. If he does marry, if he pulls the wool over the rabbi's eyes, so to speak, and it's happened, they're considered married, but it's not allowed. So therefore, Mashiach comes, and he wants to serve in the Holy Temple, he's going to have to divorce her. So this is a certain level of a holiness. A regular person is allowed to marry a divorcee. You have a get, he has a get, she has a get, get married. But a Kohen not. A Kohen Gadol, which we don't have now, He's not allowed to marry someone that was married before. He's only allowed to marry someone that was never married before. That's an extra restriction. Now, so there's two things a regular Kohen can't marry. A regular Kohen can't marry a divorcee. A regular Kohen can't marry a zonah. Now, a zonah is translated colloquially as a harlot, right? But it's more stringent than that. A regular Kohen can't marry a woman that has slept. You have to do that because nobody sleeps. Slept with a non-Jew. If the woman has slept with Jews, right, and Alpha Epsilon Pi, right, her entire, the entire gang at the fraternity, and they're all Jewish, then she is allowed to marry a Kohen, but otherwise not allowed to marry. If it's non-Jew, not allowed to marry. Now, it's very tricky to start asking who you slept with. You know, slept with. So that's a whole different ball of wax. But that is the biblical law. Then the Torah tells us something, and this era, by the way, in this era of the ADA, they would have a real hard time with it. The Torah tells us that there are a number of things that invalidate a Kohen from participating in the Holy Temple. If a Kohen has a mum, an imperfection. So if a Kohen has a broken arm, he has to wait till the broken arm is fixed. The broken leg, he has to wait till the broken leg is fixed. And there's so many different things that can invalidate. I'll give you an example, a unibrow. If the Kohen's eyebrow touches these other eyebrows, so it's a unibrow, my mother used to say that anybody that has a unibrow are generally murderers. Now, I had a unibrow. So I didn't think that was very nice, but I don't have a unibrow anymore. So that's easily fixable, the unibrow. Broken arm, broken leg, right? But there are things, if a Kohen is missing a finger, he can never offer a sacrifice in the Holy Temple, ever. And so that seems, that seems, and yeah, Steve is right. If his pupils look weird, or if a person has, they don't have a proper bridge of their nose, and it's just that you can go like this, touch both eyes without the bump, can't officiate. There's so many things that a person, a Kohen cannot officiate, that it's and you ask yourself in this era of acceptance and inclusion, what's going on here? When Mashiach comes, will it still be, or will everybody be healed? These are good questions. So it's a tricky one. The Torah tells us likewise an animal cannot have an imperfection. If an animal has an imperfection, it cannot be offered. However, so it cannot be offered, which leads us to the story of Tisha B'Av. Right? It leads us to the story of Tisha B'Av. The story of Tisha B'Av, which is the day, which is what led up to Tisha B'Av. So there is a story in the Talmud that tells us, because of this biblical law that you cannot offer up an imperfect animal, the temple was destroyed. So it goes something like this: is that a fellow by the name of a wealthy person and an honored person in Jerusalem in the times of the temple. Anyway, he had a good friend, Kamsa, and he invited him to the wedding. But by mistake, it went to his enemy, Bar Kamsa. Similar name. One is Kamsa, one is Bar Kamsa. And Bar Kamsa, who was the enemy, he was his arch enemy, said, "Oh, wow, it's an olive branch. I'll go." So he goes to the wedding. And the wealthy man sees him at the wedding, and he goes, "Get out." He goes, "Come on, man. Come on. I thought you were giving me an olive branch." He goes, "Get out." So Kamsa said, "Hold on a second. Don't embarrass me like this. Okay, don't make a scene. I'm willing to pay half the wedding." He goes, "Get lost. I don't want to see you. I hate you." He goes, "I'm asking you, I'm begging you. I'll pay for the wedding." He goes, I don't need your money, get out. And he started to scream. And he screamed at him, and the fellow left in disgrace. He left in disgrace, and he said to himself, not one person stood up for me, not one rabbi, not one sage, not one scholar, not one neighbor, nobody. And he says, because of this, I'm going to teach him a lesson. He didn't know how far the lesson would go. He sails to Rome. He has a meeting with the emperor, and he tells the emperor, the Jewish people are revolting against you. He goes, no, I haven't heard of anything. He goes, I'll prove it to you. Send them a sacrifice. You'll see they won't offer it. So he goes, well, if they won't take my sacrifice and offer it to God, then absolutely is a revolt. He says, but I know it has to be perfect without any defects whatsoever. So he sent it with this fellow, with Kamsa. Kamsa is on the ship. Kamsa makes a small slit in the inner lip of this animal. You couldn't see it on the outside, but he damages the gum of this animal. Comes to the Holy Temple. This is from the emperor. This is from Caesar. This is from Caesar. And the rabbis debate. Is that a defect? Is that not a defect? Should we just do it anyway? Should we not do it anyway? And the rabbis decided that the Torah, this week's Parshat, that if it has a defect, we have to stick to our principles. And there were many rabbis who said they could, that it was an inner defect, it wasn't an outer defect. Also, we're risking our lives because of the Caesar. A non-Jew is allowed to offer up a sacrifice anytime, but it has to be perfect. And they didn't. That led to a siege, and that led to the eventual destruction of the Holy Temple. And that's why the rabbis say that the Second Temple was destroyed because of senseless hatred. If he would have if he would have been not thrown out of the wedding, if he would not have made an injury to the inner lip, and the temple would not have been destroyed. I mean, this is God's thing. So nobody knows. Anyway, the bottom line is there was a big debate in the Talmud. The Talmud brings forth the big debate, and they did not offer up the sacrifice.
I have more of these. Bigger ones.
I'm just going to mute. Give me a second. So they did not offer the sacrifice. So that's why it was because of this week's Parsha that they, so you're allowed to offer up, a non-Jew is allowed to offer up, is allowed to dedicate something to God. And the question is, what defect is not acceptable and acceptable? And that was the debate. Then the Torah talks about the regular person. A regular person that you have to be careful when if you're going to offer up something to God, if you're going to enter to the Holy Temple, you have to make sure you're pure, and you must not. If you're not a Kohen, you're not allowed to partake of the Kohen's food. There was certain, being that the Kohen worked in the Holy Temple, being that the Levites worked in the Holy Temple, the Israelites were obligated to support them, right? And so when you brought in your harvest, you were obligated to give certain things to the Kohen, certain things to the Levi. The Levi was obligated to give to the Kohen as well, and then you had to give to the poor person, and you couldn't eat of your food until you gave your tithings. An Israelite was not allowed to eat from the tithings. An Israelite, if he ate from the tithings, it's punishable by lashes. And an Israelite, it was considered holy. So take a look at this, right? And this is basically part of Tanya that we study, is that grapes are grapes, wheat is wheat, right? However, we have the ability to separate some grapes and say, this is the Kohen, or this is for the Levite, or this is to be eaten in Jerusalem, or this is to give to the poor person, right, etc. And it becomes holy, right? It becomes holy. So you're talking about wheat stalks that if you eat them, you get lashes because they're holy. Right. So, and this is what Tanya talks about and beats at you, that that this world is only as mundane as you allow it to be. But truth be told, everything in this world, a person can turn from mundanity to holiness, right? You can take something that's just, you think is just, it's material, it's materialistic. Take money, right? You can take money and you can make it holy, right? You can take fire and it can either destroy or you can make it holy, like Shabbos candles. So because God created everything, it's up to us to make things holy. So even fire, even money, can be made holy, and we see this here clearly, that we're not allowed to partake of something that belongs to the Kohen because it's too holy for us. We make our little part holy by giving a small part to the Kohen. That redeems the rest of it, and then we make a blessing and we make our part even holier. So it's just an amazing thing. So, and I've said this before, that a human being lives in two worlds at the same time. We live in a mundane world and we live in a holy world exactly at the same time. We have a choice. We can connect the two, or we can separate the two. We can just say, okay, holy is holy. Holy is relegated to the synagogue. That's where I'll be holy, and home is my home. Or we can say, my home is holy, my synagogue is holy, the street is holy, my car is holy, and anything and everything I do is holy. It's really up to us. It's really up to us. There was years ago. So the Rebbe passed about 26 years ago. So this must be like 36 years ago. The Rebbe said that every car should have a holy book in the car. Put in your glove compartment. So everybody ran and they printed these small books that had Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya, and they made them glove compartment fittable, right? And you just leave it there. So I have one in my car. I haven't, I bought the car 9 years ago. I don't think I've opened it, but it's there. And even one's home, right? One of the Rebbe's campaigns is that every house should have holy books, right? You may not even open it, but they're there. They're in your house. The Rebbe said that every kitchen should have a charity box. So that while you're cooking food for your family, remember to give charity. And that makes your kitchen holy. And there was like 10 campaigns that the Rebbe said to make one's life holy. And maybe we're going to, in next week, not this week, we're going to, on our Judaism class during the day, we're going to talk about weddings from beginning, the engagement period, all the halachas, all the Jewish laws that are, because my kid's getting married, so I'm steeped into it now. So we'll go through the engagement and all the halachas. But next week, I think we're going to go through the Rebbe's campaigns of how to lead a holy life. But that's the idea. You give that wheat to the Kohen, you can no longer touch it. It's not yours. It's been elevated. It's holiness. Then the Torah gets into the holidays. So the Torah says, speak to the Jewish people, and you should tell them that 6 days, right? These are the holidays. 6 days shall you do work, and on the seventh day is Shabbat. So there's two different thoughts on this. One is that the Torah, before it starts the holidays, it tells you the Shabbat is a weekly holiday, and just because it comes around weekly, you should still cherish it as much as you cherish the holidays. So we all gear up for Passover because the Seder is twice a year, right? Make special arrangements for Shabbat also. As we know in the story in the Talmud, it says that there was a great Rabbi Shammai, who used to walk to synagogue in the morning, and he used to pass the butcher, and this was Monday, and he sees a rib steak, and he goes in and goes, I want to buy that for Shabbat. So he buys it. But then he passes by Tuesday and sees even a nicer cut of meat. He goes, okay, forget yesterday's purchase. I want to buy that for Shabbat. So every day he lives Shabbat. So that's one commentary, that God is telling us about Shabbat. The other commentary is that it's still about the holidays. 6 days shall you do work. In other words, Rosh Hashanah's Passover is 1 day in the beginning, 1 day at the end. Shavuot is 1 day. Rosh Hashanah is 1 day, right? Sukkot is 1 day in the beginning, 1 day at the end. 6 days are you allowed to do work, you're allowed to carry, you're allowed to cook. On the 7th day, but 1 day, Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to do work. So according to others, it's still talking about the holidays. But he goes into the various holidays. So the Torah tells us that the first month, which is Nisan is the first month. We're, by the way, in the second month, Iyar. So